Okay, so we are now recording. Welcome everyone to our weekly call. Let me just share my screen for a moment, partly to say thank you to DNS, sponsors of our call. As always, their support is very much appreciated. Okay, so in terms of the agenda for today, the main topic we're going to touch on is the use of AI tools at standards bodies. And then we'll touch on a few things from sort of the news headlines, etc. And time permitting, under AOB, I will conduct a very short poll, opinion poll for the avoidance of doubt. Just to garner some views, but we'll see how we get on time-wise, whether we can accommodate that. In terms of context for this discussion, this was prompted, at least in part, by a very interesting series of presentations at the during IETF 126 in Vienna a week or so ago. One session in particular touched on the use of AI tools. It was the RASP research group. And I thought the presentations were really interesting. Excuse me, and they surfaced some sort of conflicting points potentially. So with that in mind, Tom made the mistake of mentioning to me he'd been experimenting with one of the tools. So I took that as him effectively volunteering to talk about that tool, which I'll hand over to him in a second to talk about. And I sort of just tested a different one, which to be honest was far easier to actually use. So Tom will talk about a tool that Mark Nottingham from Cloudflare, I believe, authored to help with engagement within the IETF. And then I'm going to look at a tool, I'll probably do a little demonstration because it's really simple, of a tool which helps you detect the probability of something being authored mainly by a human or by AI. So that's the plan. So firstly, as I say, the tool that Mark Nottingham authored, which is, I think, Tom tailored specifically for the IETF. So it felt like appropriate to start with that, and then we'll look at the other one and perhaps see where the conversation takes us about more general issues as they apply to standards bodies. So with that, Tom, over to you.
Right. Yeah, I'll do a quick demo of this tool. As you say, we were introduced to it in the IETF meeting in Vienna a week or so ago. Andrew and I have been working to get various things into the IETF. I'm particularly a newbie, the IETF. Don't know the people, don't know the processes as well as I might. So I thought this tool could be particularly interesting. Mark Nottingham is somebody I've come across a few times, and he's usually sort of fairly well switched on. He also seems to be more willing to embrace AI than some others. So the link to the tool is there. It's on GitHub. On the GitHub, he does suggest that the best mode of operation is a local MCP server. I have found this to be true. It's pretty easy to install, a couple of bits of Python, and then what you do, I will just share my prompt here. So you go and fetch the bits of IETF that are interesting. So I'm going to go fetch dispatch. So it goes off and fetch this. Now I've asked it to fetch 48 months, which is a good deal more than standard. You can all see my screen there, I presume. Oh.
Yes.
Oh no, that's the wrong thing that I'm sharing. Curse it. No, I'm sharing the right thing. just got the wrong thing up. There we go. Yes, it's good. Looks good. Super. So yeah, 48 months is a good deal longer than the standard, which is 12. But I was looking for in my first few searches sort of history of what had happened before, rather than the other use case, which is I want to catch up on what's recently happened. I was a bit worried that it would take a long time. This isn't doing all 48 months. This is just pulling whatever's happened since I last used it, which was last week. So it does take a little minute to go and grab all of the threads. So it uses IMAP to go and pull all the email threads. It goes to the data tracker. So you can give it each individual section. So I've given it dispatch here. I've got DNS op, a couple of others sort of loaded in. So it will do a kind of an incremental update, if you will. So it's incrementally updated that. I can now run Claude, and I can ask Claude good questions about IETF. So I can say, I'm planning to submit new proposal to the IETF. Who is most active in dispatch? Who are the folks I need to get on side? Let's see how Claude does with that. So it goes and uses IETF LLM. It's pretty simple to add that into Claude Code. Yes, off you pop. Go and use IETF LLM, and it can pull this data back much more straightforwardly from the local MCP than going and doing web searches, which would take a long time and use a ton of tokens. So I'll just let Claude do its thinking. Yeah, keep going. Just go and do anything you like. Ruin my computer. I don't care. And the data is helpfully very, very structured. We're told that data tracker goes back quite some time, but gets sort of fuzzy as it gets a bit older. Probably wouldn't want to go back more than 4 or 5 years. But because it's got everything locally, so it's saving me a fair chunk of tokens and a fair chunk of time to go and make this determination.
Was that what, just while it's thinking? That's
Yes.
the conversation you have with a lot of people, but it will take a long time to sort of, or you might be very lucky just to get a random cross section of people that will give you an informed view, as opposed to trawling through what's happened over the last 4 years to provide an opinion.
Yeah. So as you can see, it's pulled that together really quite nicely. So we knows the chairs, gives you a bit of explanation. So there's a few additional pieces that you can pull in that Mark's written that give Claude some information about how the IETF works, which is kind of handy to have that in, because that helps Claude sort of with the structure, if you will, of the organization and a bit of sense making. Those Mark admitted by his own admission that were his opinions more than of how to do things, more than sort of official stuff, but I found them useful. So I don't think anyone who's been to the dispatch will actually be surprised to see Eric being the highest of anyone who's a non-chair. And it's even picked up that people call him Eka rather than Eric, which was quite confusing to me to begin with. Who is this guy? Were the two people? No, just the one. So it's it's pretty handy to be able to pull stuff like that back, and also for the other use case of just go catch me up on DNS op. For example, if you find for some reason all those emails just end up getting archived, and you want to pick up from a particular date, the LLM can do that pretty cheaply token wise, and yeah, I found it to work very well. Any questions? I might not be able to answer.
Just while people are thinking, Tom, I think one of the sort of use cases you mentioned was you could provide a link to a draft and ask it to give you an informed view of the likely response to a document.
Yes, because I looked at our parsec draft, for example, and was able to dig back into dispatch archives and look at things like when the DNS filtered responses work was going through, who was pro that, who was anti that, what sort of opinions they had, where those might cross paths with our draft. So it's really useful for. I mean, this is. I wish we'd had this a year ago, so we could have sharpened it up.
Yes.
Hindsight is always 20/20, isn't it? But it's very useful for giving you an idea of what might occur, because there are a lot of things that have already happened out there that um, not things not to do, like that. The response there, um, worth knowing. Dispatcher zone framing is not a place to present your draft, but a place to decide where your work should go. Pitch it that way, not as a spec walkthrough. Like, good point. Doesn't always happen there.
Yeah.
And explicit deployment, interest naming real organizations, generically there's growing interest, language gets called out publicly by Fenton and Rescorla. So it's kind of like it's picked out what's happened in the past quite neatly, which would have been much harder should you just go and ask it to go and scrape the web views of the mailing list. I don't think you would have got anywhere near.
Yeah. Sorry, Pete, you got your hand raised. You had a question or comment?
Yeah, I'm curious. So this is the IETF LLM it works as a kind of local MCP server that lets you query the IETF like working data, like the data that's been created from the mailing list and from various places. Does it? I suppose it's not part of this tool to explicitly to help you draft documents or anything like that. But Claude could do that, I suppose. It's just
Yeah,
part of what
and
Claude
it
does.
certainly would be helpful, allied with Mark's kind of "this is how you should do things" documents, which are more Mark than necessarily IETF, but that he is very experienced in that sort of thing, and the history that this tool gives you. I think it would make your chances of kind of running a simulation of what might happen in dispatch, given your you
That's
presented
interesting.
X, would be really handy, and it would be you get a reasonable response there. That's one thing I tried, and I certainly shall also be using it to catch me up on things that are of interest to me out of pretty busy groups. I've started an MD file of these are the things that I find interesting, so Claude can pull out the real gems for me.
I guess it will work with ChatGPT as well, OpenAI's
Yeah,
tools, because
yeah.
it's
As long
MCP.
as it's an MCP compatible thingamabob, then you're quite all right.
What do you know? What format the local files are stored in? It's just a bunch of Markdown files.
Yes, they are exportable as well. Um, so you can go and move them around the place. But yeah, it's just a local load of Markdown files.
Okay,
Uh,
interesting. Have you noticed? I mean, I don't know if you've used it extensively enough, but have you noticed any like hallucinations or anything like that?
I'm not sure I'd notice.
Hmm.
Um, I
Maybe
don't,
that's a useful,
you know,
helpful warning, isn't it? If you're asking it to summarize what's happened, I don't know, in the TLS working group over the last 12 months, you wouldn't necessarily know what it made up unless it was so out of context it was obvious.
yeah.
So that would be the risk if you're leaning on it too heavily.
Just
So
a
just there
general.
to show you that where the Markdown files are, so you can easily like export it and stick it somewhere else.
Ah, cool.
Um,
Right. Just as a general tip, by the way, I found two things really helpful when dealing with LLMs is two questions you could ask as follow-up. Like, what did you get wrong in the last answer? And what are you least confident about right now? And often it can reveal sort of areas of its previously confident answer that it's not super, you know, maybe should have put in a bit, a few more conditionals. Anyway, cool. Thanks, Tom. That was really interesting.
I lost the react button or the raise hand button again. Arnaud here.
uh,
Hey, Tom. So, Tom, yeah, I arrived a bit late. My apologies. So, I missed the beginning. So, you use the IETF LLM to to try to get something from the dispatch mailing list. Is this my understanding correct?
yes, to use the history of the dispatch mailing list to try and sort of predict the future, if you will. Um,
Mm.
um, in fact, I used it to predict the very recent past of what people would say about the Parsec draft, and it was surprisingly accurate.
Yeah. So I'm using Claude myself since March. Yeah, March, April, May, June. Yeah, so it's like a few months now that I'm using it. And I must say, it saved my life. It absolutely saved my life. And to answer Peter, I've not put in writing, I didn't draft contributions to IETF like internet drafts that I know I could. But now it's so tuned that, for example, I can compose my emails, I can draft my contributions to ITU, I can exactly understand a summary of a long thread of emails. I can manage my contacts. I can manage my GitLab, my GitHub, my GitLab. I can do so. In fact, what I did is I specialized a number of experts on my machine, and I'm getting results that I could not have imagined I could get. So there are three particular contributions I did for IT17. One was more than 400 pages long, 500 pages long at the beginning. If I would have had to do it by myself, it would have taken me 6 months of work minimum. And for two others, so that one was complex for a human, but probably not too complex for a machine because it was a lot of cross-reference and JSON scripts. And so here the machine had a superior, I mean, the AI had a real superior advantage. The thing that surprised me the most was when I rebuilt the foundation for security after 8 weeks of work by 30 people and 120 documents. I asked it to do, I had a very long prompt to do a very specific model and meta model, and it did it. This, I was, fortunately, I was seated because I was totally speechless when I saw the result. Unbelievable. And this one, just to recompose everything, to re-go through NIST CSF and CDM and the CISA Zero Trust, all of them, abstract them, remake it correctly, and rescan them in a very specific list of questions per page. Per page. That was really amazing. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Arnold, I use AI a lot, and it is amazing the stuff that it can do. I think that the part of the power comes from the coding agents, which are able to sort of create scripts which can deterministically recreate things. And so building those tools for you is part of the power. I was curious really about this specific tool, the IETF LLM, and how it was being used here, because it's what was the intent of it? And it looks like it's a sort of almost a caching service which gets the stuff for you and allows you to query it via MCP quite easily.
Mm.
But yeah, one thing I have found though, but again, this is my personal anecdote, so not a meta study, but like I do find that there is a certain flavor to the output if you're asking for like documents to be created that are to be intended to be read by other humans, like blog posts, articles, drafts for things. With technical writing, I think that you can probably, if it's if it's a particular style like an RFC or an IETF draft, you might be able to match the existing stuff more closely. But when it's a sort of personal voice, it seems to tend to be like a little bit AI-y. But this is just my
So
experience.
it depends, because the other day I played that. I was with my co-chair of the focus group TIDA that we just launched at SSG17, and Deborah, and we were just smashed. It was at the end of IETF. We were dead tired. I just could not process anything. So we asked my AI to do something, and then I said, okay, this is an email I could send to a mailing list. I forgot which one, and she smiled, because in fact, when she read it, she could hear my voice. That was exactly my style. And but again, this was I took the risk to open my email to my AI, and now it does email like I'm writing them.
Yeah, I think the training as well on your personal voice is it can learn, which is good.
Well, I mean, that takes us neatly on in parts to a question that Zaid has posted in the chat. So, I mean, made a comment first, just for the record, which was perhaps an easier experiment would be to evaluate a document shepherd output, which I think is fair, because you could obviously compare what the document shepherd wrote with its equivalent from the AI sort of system. I should have said, in case it wasn't clear, by the way, it's called IETF LLM. Just to emphasize, it was something put together as an experiment really by Mark Nottingham. So it's not an official IETF tool per se, in case anyone inferred that from the title. But on to Zaid's second point, which is, should AI use be footnoted as AI output in some way? And I'll share a couple of thoughts on that, and others can comment, which is probably I've changed my mind on this and come around to the view that if you're publishing it, say if I'm publishing a response on a mailing list, whether I wrote it or an AI did, it's kind of on me. Therefore, if I just blindly copy and paste something and it's garbage, then ultimately that should reflect on my reputation. So, yeah, and let's be clear, I can easily write rubbish without the aid of AI. So, I think okay, that was obviously a tongue-in-cheek comment, but I think it's valid, which is, if you write rubbish, people should no doubt take that into account when assessing the validity or otherwise of your comment. So personally, I've come around to the view that no, you shouldn't footnote something or indicate it was written by AI. By publishing it, you're implicitly or explicitly taking responsibility for its quality, for good or ill, would be my view. So comments on that. But also, if you like, the other side of that is, yes, you can easily use a tool, for example, to auto-respond to comments on a mailing list, say from a IETF working group, if we think about the IETF. A lot of AI-generated stuff tends to be quite verbose, to say the least. And I think we're already seeing that, comment from Philippe in the chat. We're already seeing that a lot, where things are overlong and appearing almost instantaneously in response to something. So there's clearly been no time for reflection. So getting around to the point, I think the biggest issue is not so much with something authored by AI. The point which I sort of raised in the research group on the mic, so I want to test here, is the biggest risk is it dramatically lowers the barriers to participation and makes it dead easy for me to swamp a mailing list with my ill-considered thoughts and simultaneously write, I don't know, 20 different internet drafts to go into dispatch. So it's trivial to effectively swamp the system, given that ultimately the rules of the IETF, I think, largely depend on human review of stuff to assess it. I think that's largely true of SDOs in general. So I know we got people here with the experience of a range of SDOs and sort of SDO equivalents. I wonder whether the rules need to be dramatically changed to take into account the fact that AI exists, and therefore things like moderation, approach to moderation, gating of comments, etc., whether that needs to be completely rethought. So comments on that appreciated, but Peter.
So first of all, I kind of agree with you about the this was AI assisted or created with AI. There was a thing with Linus Torvalds recently commented on code committed to the Linux kernel that was created by AI, and he was asked his opinion. He said, "I don't care. If it's good code, it goes in the kernel. If it's bad code, it doesn't. That's it." Which I think was a fair point. He's very AI neutral. And also, it's got to the point where, we don't say this email was composed in Outlook or Gmail or whatever. It's just a tool at the moment, I think. It's got to the point where it's sort of a tool. But it's a really interesting point you made about the barrier to entry to creating drafts and things like this. I think the barrier to entry, like if you cared about something enough to go to the effort of understanding how the IETF works and who are the people to talk to and being part of the mailing list and understanding all of this, there is a sort of implicit, like, I want this enough that I think this is important enough to go through that effort to go and write this draft myself and get the backing and have the discussion with it. And that's sort of been taken away almost in some ways, which is a good and a bad thing, because the barrier to entry can be very frustrating. If you have a good idea and don't want to spend 2 years understanding how all the bits work, yeah. So it's probably going to cause some problems, I think, with a lot of things that are maybe not well thought through. But it's an interesting point. That's all I can say about it.
Maybe just to sort of CVEs in same sort of similar problem, different context, but broadly. Yeah. Okay. Simon, who I know has got experience of Etsy amongst other bodies.
Yes, for avoiding doubt, that's where most of my experience comes from. No, I would make the point that I tend to make in this circumstances, which is that an SDO works on a culture and reasonableness, and we can't really write that in the rules. We can indicate directions, but if someone's going to write a load of rubbish with AI, do we have a rule that says you can't write a load of rubbish with AI? What is a load of rubbish anyway? Can we define it? No, I think is the answer. We can indicate that we don't want lots of stuff written by AI that's not been processed by humans. But I think the actual final doing it is the action of humans, and humans being reasonable. And we've got to sort of set expectations. And if Joe Blogs is always writing rubbish by AI, someone's got to go and talk to him in a corner and say, please don't do this. Obviously, if too many pleases don't work, then maybe we have to sort of work out how we throw this guy or people out of the room. But I think it comes down to reasonable actions of humans, and while we can embed things in the rules, we rely on people at the end of the day, and hopefully SDOs will continue to rely on people, otherwise they won't really be SDOs. Thanks.
Yeah, I think my comment sort of said I think culturally that SDOs have relied on good faith in participation, and you're right, that's quite hard to encapsulate that in the rule book, but yeah, maybe it just needs something around moderation, perhaps. Who knows?
There is an interesting parallel discussion going on about the UK Parliament and how we've relied on no written constitution, no real written rules on like how Parliament should work, like it's sort of like a gentlemanly conduct, if you will, rules that are now being broken by folks, and there's no kind of no checks and balances other than kind of sort of becoming a social pariah, which I think is an interesting parallel to what we're seeing with misbehaving machines and indeed people.
Yeah, Fair point. Okay, Andreas, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I want to back up Tom a little bit because also my experience from using AI is pretty much very close to it. Because the more I get out of AI is when I get good data in it. So if you get crappy data in your AI, you get crappy results out. So it really matters what the AI is basing its output on. If you start brainstorming or any other stupid things, you rely far too much on the LLM itself. The data is really the core of what you're working with. And also what Arnaud said is pretty true in my experience. Once when we were reviewing a big set of documents as part of a EU public consultation. I think you may know this process of EU public consultations. It was related to an update to the AI Act when it took place and took effect. You got 900 replies to that online. So no human being ever will review 900 replies. Each conduct at least 2 or 3 pages of PDF. Some replies conduct really like 50 or 100 pages, and you have no chance to review. So what I did is a good old deterministic Python script, did download all the results, submitted online for me, have put it in a specific place for my AI, and then I could interact with that data just with that AI. I used Microsoft Copilot for it, basically, but the results were amazing because you get what you want and you get the reference to who said that. And that's also pretty much what Tom demoed, right? The stuff that he got was also reference to where the MCP server got it from. So if you really want to make use of AI in a good way, make sure the data you feed in is very valuable for you and the data must be correct. That also helps you to not get problems with hallucinations and so on. But the creativity part, let's say, that should be with the human.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And I guess one early observation from what I've seen from the LLM, IETF LLM tool is because it's got, as you say, good data. It's trained on the data tracker. So it's got a wealth of stuff, perfectly tailored to that SDO. I mean, it would probably be less useful to generate something for the ITU without significant retraining, but for the target it's intended for, it is very, very tightly focused, which is helpful. Arno.
Yes. So the problem I'm facing, or let's say the problem I'm trying to consider here, on the same line, Andrew, is in fact which are the rules that an SDO can allow itself to do regarding the use of AI, right? So, especially for us at the ITU, that's a bit special because we have member states here, that creates some complication. And so I created, first of all, as a spoiler, I don't have the answer, but I created the contribution regarding tooling that ask the secretariat and the membership to think about how we are going to use AI in the future. For example, should we declare it? Should we declare it with just a labeling, like something that says this part was generated by AI, or this part was generated by this AI, or with this prompt, or with whatever, how many details we want to go to from an auditing perspective. Because one of the problems I have, so I think it was Peter who asked the question of hallucinations, and yes, it hallucinates. Of course, it hallucinates. So very often I have to check. And still, I mean, it's not that it hallucinates all the time at all. There are many good things it does, but sometimes you have to be careful. And sometimes it's for stupid things. For example, in ITU we have author's guides. And at some point I said, okay, you follow exactly the author's guide and you do this and that and that. And it failed multiple times. So I was annoyed and I asked it, so what are you doing? And then it realized it was hallucinating. And so what I did to fix that, I created an expert on SG17 documents and I created its skills, its rules, my rules, and so on and so forth. So this way you can sort of decrease the number of hallucinations, make it really predictable or the way you want. But still, the problem I have with this is what happens. So my fear is another one. My fear is an adversary knowing that people are dealing with that to write standards, and that step by step make some little changes or little wording that does not look bad today, but after 30 years of accumulation, we go through exactly what we should not have. And I don't know how to prevent that, right? But because it's like for human, it's like for a society that since 30 years, I suppose, some countries, not going to say, have played that game, if not from 40 years ago, right? So some countries playing this game to each time the society needs to make a decision, we took the wrong option. These were little things, but cumulated over 40 years, that probably is one aspect of why we end up where we are right now in the world. So how to get this done? Probably it's good to have AI detection systems and counter systems and develop multiple views on that, and from multiple countries or from multiple AIs from multiple countries, and still give it back to the humans to agree. So I would like to go back to Simon's point that at the end of the day, he is right. It's about the culture of each SDO and so on. But to summarize my thoughts, is it fair to use AI installation? Yes, because what we do is particularly good in terms of the language has been curated since decades. We have many data. We have a lot of recommendations and standards that exist. We have a lot of background. But is AI, the way you use it like completely in the wild now, correct? I don't think so. And where to find the balance, I didn't find yet the solution, but we will need to find something. One thing, for example, would be one thing I would like with the IETF LLM, because I'm trying to do the same with the ITU, to have an ITU LLM, is that at least the secretariat can curate that and can say for these particular things, I am guaranteeing up to a certain level that what it does is correct, so that I could just connect to that one, keep my added value on my computer because I have my own knowledge, my own creativity, my own style and so on, but that's mine, right? And make the real distinction between that's what I can leverage from a curated LLM from a secretariat, and that's what I add on top of that. Over.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. I mean, to your point about, in 40 years' time, etc., before you notice the impact, it's, hesitate to say it given who I'm talking to, Arnaud, but it's the boiled frog syndrome. You're gradually raising the water temperature, and you don't realise that it's too late. As I say, apologies for the phrasing, but I can't think of a different idiom to use for that. But yeah, maybe that will be the solution over time, that there's an official sort of SDO blessed thing but that you can then add your own tooling on top of to tailor it. Comment in the chat, and then I'm going to flip to the demo because I think it'd be quite timely at this point and it's quite short. So Neil raised the point about, are there any guardrails, etc., being put in place at the moment, such as in the DNS working groups in the IETF? As far as I'm aware, no. But I think there's certainly the awareness is certainly there now of both the benefits and the potential downsides of the tooling, at least at an early stage. I should just briefly touch on one of the other benefits, which of course, if English isn't your first language, then this sort of tooling could be tremendously helpful in both improving your comprehension and also your output, which makes it, again, harder to say we can't have AI generated input. But the RASP research group is contemplating holding an interim meeting to continue the dialogue on this discussion. It feels to me like it's the right sort of forum is a research group in the first instance to try and surface some of the issues. So I think Ignacio, who some of you will know, who's one of the co-chairs for that working group. Hopefully he'll get that scheduled in the next couple of months, so probably September, early October, so in good time before the next IETF meeting, at least. It'll be interesting to see how the discussion goes. Right, let me just briefly flip on to the second demo, because I'm just conscious of the time and I think it will be useful to see. So I'm just going to share my screen. So you should see this. It's just a browser tool. I've got some slides to go with this, but firstly, just to show you the tool, because it's really simple to understand. So this is the landing page, and as it says, is it AI? You put in the URL, and it's really intended for 00 internet drafts. So you put the URL in here, and I've got some examples. So I put in our parsec draft, and its conclusion was it's all green, so it's human rather than AI. And it actually goes to 4 different tools. So you can see Claude, Grok, GPT, and Gemini. And it gives you a breakdown of the scoring towards the bottom of the screen. And you can see the sort of graph in just upper middle of the screen, what the range of scores were between the different tools, give you a sort of confidence level for them based on measurements of uniformity, etc. So different sort of looks at different dimensions and comes to a conclusion. I looked at a really old draft, and that came to a 10% score of likelihood of being AI, which is highly likely because I think this was written something like 1994, so predates any meaningful AI in this context. Conversely, I looked at quite a chunky draft that was put forward in Shenzhen that came up with a 25% score, so starting to get towards might be AI, but probably human. And then finally, again, a different, this is a random selection to try and get a different sort of range of scores. And it's now coming much sort of higher number. So leaning towards the likelihood of being AI, but again, not definitively. So that's just to give you a range of different scores, but it's literally you just put the URL in, press the button, and that's it. So it's a really simple sort of user interface. And then to just quickly flip to my slides to put up, I'm just going to sort of leverage the materials on this. So this was Jaime Jiménez from Ericsson who presented this. I'm not sure if I think he possibly wrote the tool, but I can't remember if he actually said that. So if I change slides, so he just explained how it worked, which is just it farms out different elements to 4 different models, as you just saw, and then comes back with a score to give you a broad indication, which is helpful. But I think a key thing here I'd highlight this is the end of his slides I'm using is, as it said, the bottom 2 bullets. Because of the style of a lot of technical documents, they may appear more like AI, but also non-English, sort of non-native speaking English prose might also trigger the AI tooling, even if it was written by a human and not AI. So that's his sort of declared limitations. But I thought that was quite a useful tool, really simple to use, because there's no settings for it. As you saw, you literally just put in the URL and fire it in, press the button, and that's it. So if you're uncertain of the source of a document, it doesn't do any harm just to feed it in there and just get an indication of the probability of it being written by AI. Or a human. So unless anyone's got any burning points. I'm going to just briefly move on to a couple of other things, but let me just pause there in case anyone does. So give you a chance to jump in if you do.
I would just say, please, nobody tell my boss that I've just wasted a bunch of tokens asking the LLM what Arno's opinion on zero trust is. Surprisingly, he has never aired these opinions particularly vociferously on the mailing lists. So there's a job for you, Arno.
Yes.
Sorry, what, Tom?
I asked the LLM if you'd ever aired any opinions about zero trust on the mailing lists, and surprisingly, you haven't.
Sadly, it doesn't audio from side meetings in Madrid. Otherwise, I beg to differ, but it's outside its reference material.
You mean on the IETF mailing list? Yeah, no, I never expressed myself there, but better not. Better not. In fact, to be honest, it's not that I am against zero trust. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that zero trust is not defined by NIST correctly, and that created a lot of issues. And now we have a complete mess in the real business. And so, in fact, we spent the time in ITU to redefine it correctly. And that's what will be created in Chongqing at this time, because we are finishing this work. So I hope to have a better grammatically phrased definition, because even the NIST, which is the only one, is not even grammatically a definition. So, but I'm not going to enter that discussion in IETF, especially because in IETF I would contest that the security people are not there. The security protocol people are there, but not the security operational people.
I think just did the equivalent of putting white text on a white background in the instructions to the AI to get it to do the equivalent of, I don't know, writing in Shakespearean sonnets rather than sticking to the subject matter, which was a fine demonstration. Right, let me just quickly, I will do this briefly so we wrap up on time. A few things from the weekly news headlines. Firstly, since we've referenced IETF, amongst other things, last week, Jeff Houston kindly wrote a summary of DNS-related topics at the IETF, including at least one of the side meetings on post-quantum DNSSEC, and also shared his thoughts on DELIC. So if you want a sort of fairly rounded sort of take on DNS-related discussions in Vienna, I would refer you to the APNIC blog, with a health warning that Jeff does have particular opinions on DELIC, and that does potentially come across in his notes, but nevertheless, a human written summary, I'm sure. Also, Infoblox last week published its threat landscape report, threw out some really fascinating stats, some of which were quite disturbing, such as, I think I mentioned a few weeks ago, Inter-Isle Consulting at the last ICANN meeting suggested at least 20% of domains registered last year were sort of registered by bad actors, broadly consistent with Infoblox's take of 22% of newly observed domains exhibited malicious or suspicious characteristics. So sort of same order of magnitude, and a whole bunch of other fascinating stats. Well worth a read, both the article and also the report itself. And coincidentally, as I put on there, IBM just published its cost of a data breach report for 2026, which in my head at least sits quite well with the Infoblox threat landscape. So you might want to look at both of those. Sort of discussion about the linkage or potential linkage between AI and the DNS from Pratik Prasad, also coincidentally of Infoblox, and a plug for DNS Aid to use the DNS to sort of discover and verify agentic AI agents to discover and verify each other. We'll talk about that on this call next week, that broad topic area. I'll skip over most of these. ICANN has issued a breach notice to a so-called bulletproof registrar who part of their business model is to disregard all enforcement requests, so they're potentially going to lose their accreditation. They may have done so by now because that was from a few weeks ago. So that was, from my perspective, good to see. And that was probably, oh no, yeah, a reminder that there's potentially a community day at the OARC. Sorry, restart. Firstly, at the next ICANN meeting, ICANN 87 in mid-October, there's a call for participation for a DNS sec and security workshop, which will take place during that meeting. So anyone interested, you got till mid-September to put forward a short, as Dan York has suggested, 1 to 3 sentence description of what you might present, and they'll formulate a program from that. But also, one I was going to say first, but got confused, OARC 47, day 3 is going to be a community day. Again, request to put forward suggestions for slots on that day. So a reminder for both of those. You've got till 24th of August, so that's coming up in about 3 weeks from now. Loads of other stuff. No time to go through any of it, but these are other things that caught my eye over the last week from a variety of topics. AI showing up quite strongly, unsurprisingly, in quite a few governance related things, and I think at least one post-quantum from memory. But anyway, you can read through those or not at your leisure, and apologies for a long list this week. In terms of impending deadlines, if you want to take advantage of the ripe early bird rate, you've potentially just missed it. Apologies, I should have deleted that one. More usefully, today is the deadline if you want to apply for IGF 2026, so Internet Governance Forum Participation Support Grants. You got the 12th if you want to apply for new GTLDs through ICANN, so that's coming up quite soon. And remember, you have to, there's an application fee with that, and it's quite chunky. I think $240,000 per GTLD or something like that, quite a lot. Right 93 call for presentations also coming up on the 14th. Call for speakers for the Adblocker Dev Summit on the 16th. And last one I mentioned, the Nominate DNS Fund that we talked about on this call a few weeks ago. Deadline for that's the 17th. So you've got a couple of weeks or so for that. But if you're planning to put something in, I'd do so sooner rather than later. Yeah, plenty of other stuff, but further off, so we won't worry about that. I haven't got any events on my radar until early September when OSNOG kicks things off, and then APNIC, and then also September, the ITU study group 17 Content Week in China. So a few things through September, but October onwards gets really rather busy. As I said, we talk about agentic AI naming and discovery on this call next week. I think with potentially Jim, also Adrian Farrell, who some of you will know from Old Dog Consulting, who chaired the Dawn BOF at the IETF meeting, will join us, possibly others. And then just on the hour, curious, so very, very selfishly, if any of you have any preference for any of those 3 things, I was deciding whether or not to refresh the graphic I use for the news headlines each week. So if you have any preferences for A is the current one, B and C are 2 potential new and different ones, because I've used that one for probably about 3 years now. So I wonder whether it was, and preferably not to put A or B as an answer. That's not overly helpful. You're only allowed pick one if you have a preference. This is an unscientific poll just to take soundings, what people might think. This small but well-chosen sample so far, B's looking like possibly the favourite. Interesting. Right, we're a minute over, but let me just stop sharing in case anyone has anything else you wanted to mention. And Arno does. So yeah, come in, Arno.
Yeah, very quick. On the Dawn story, I would have a lot to say. But if people want to have a real chance to make discovery work, they better join the focus group TIDA. That's what I believe is going to happen.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, remember to join the call next week. And
I'm off. I'm in holidays. That's why I say it now.
shocking. How very European of you. Well, you can call in from your holiday. I'm sure they got comms, and I imagine your wife would be very happy if you did that. Possibly not. Don't do that. Right. No one else has raised any hands or got anything typing in the chat. So, okay. Well, apologies for running slightly over time. I hope that was useful. Thanks to Tom in particular for sort of volunteering to do a quick demo. That was much appreciated. And yeah. If that triggers any thoughts, perhaps we can always continue the discussion. Yeah, voluntold, as he's put in the chat. We can always continue discussion over the next few weeks. But have a fantastic week all, and catch up same time next week when we talk about all things agentic AI discovery and verification using the DNS. So catch you all then. Bye all.